So, welcome everybody. Thank you for making the time and being here with us today. Thanks to Keren Hayesot Foundation for providing us with this webinar platform. Participants, you are all muted right now, but you can later on ask questions and all throughout the webinar via the chat option. And now, let me introduce you Dr. Thomas Zweifel, former CEO, professor and award-winning author of 8 books, amongst them The Rabbi and the CEO, 10 Commandments for the 21st Century. My name is Georg Hoffmann. We also have Philip Vandenberg with us as a co-panelist. Welcome to today's webinar on the first commandment, which we start today in a crisis. And actually, let's first flash back, Thomas, to another crisis and another period in our lives, especially your life. Let me share the screen here.
And Georg, as you do that, I am so happy that all of you have joined. Thank you for making time, at least in Switzerland, it's a very beautiful day. So thank you for making the time to be on this webinar.
Millionen von Leuten standen mit ihnen auf der Straße. Ich nehme an, vor allem beim zweiten Flugzeug brach Panik aus.
Das ist richtig. Es sind also Leute, wir haben Leute gesehen, die persönlich von dem Dach, von dem World Trade Center in den Tod gesprungen sind, weil sie es einfach nicht aushalten konnten, evakuiert zu werden. Es war eine Panik, aber ich muss ehrlich sagen, dass die Leute auf der Straße sich sehr nobel benommen haben und also nach einer anfänglichen Panik sehr gut reagiert haben und relativ ruhig dann einfach nach Norden evakuiert worden sind.
Dann waren Sie nicht mehr dabei, als das Gebäude eingestürzt ist?
Ich habe das Gebäude persönlich einstürzen sehen und das war eigentlich der größte Schock, weil das war das Symbol von US-Kapitalismus und das Symbol von New York schlussendlich. Also die Skyline von New York sieht völlig anders aus jetzt als noch vor 4-5 Stunden oder 7 Stunden.
Vielen Dank, Thomas Zweifel. Millionen von Leuten standen mit Ihnen auf der Straße.
So yeah, Thomas, there were subtitles in this video, but please summarize for us shortly what happened to you during the 9/11 attacks when you were in New York.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Georg. And again, thank you for everybody who's here in this webinar. There are so many different people from different walks of life. You know, there are former clients, there are Swiss Consulting Group consultants from our former company, there are students, there are Keren Hayesot people here and supporters, there are students and readers and many people that I don't know, but I think what unites us is this shared exploration. How can we be powerful? How can we keep control in this crisis? And Georg, this 9/11 was a previous crisis where I literally felt that the ground was being pulled under my feet. I remember standing at the Brooklyn Promenade and I saw the planes fly in, both planes. The first plane I thought was an accident. The second plane, I knew it was a terrorist attack. I could see the underbelly of the airplane. I had never seen anything like it. It looked like a military plane. But then I saw it was a civilian plane that was crashing into the World Trade Center. And millions of particles of dust were blowing over from the World Trade Center. I was about 200 meters away. And when the building collapsed, my world collapsed. I literally could not stand anymore. I sat down on a bench and I cried. And on that day, I felt like one of those defining moments. You know, you may have heard this term by Antonio Damasio, who is a brain researcher, who said there are somatic moments. Those are basically somatic markers. Those are defining moments where from one moment to the next, you don't know anymore where to stand. And I think we've all had those moments, you know, maybe when you became a father or a mother for the first time, or when you got your first job, or when 9/11 happened. And I would also say that in this crisis, in this Corona crisis, many of us are disoriented as well and have lost orientation, lost where to stand. And I also want to say, Georg, that my heart goes out to all those people around the world who are suffering right now, who are either facing severe threats to their health or severe threats to their employment or their financial security or their economic security. My heart goes out to everybody. And at the same time, I think this crisis gives us a chance to orient ourselves newly.
That's what happened to you, right? So also after 9/11, it led you into meeting actually Rabbi Aaron Raskin and eventually co-writing a book with him. How did you come about this cooperation? How did you actually deal with the crisis back then in 2001?
Right, it's all coming back to me now. So I was sitting on the promenade the next day and this rabbi comes up to me and says, "Are you Jewish?" And normally I would say, you know, buzz off, this is none of your business. But I was so shaken up in that moment that I said, yes, my mother is Jewish, my father is Christian. I did not have a Jewish upbringing at all, but I said in that moment, yes, I think let's get together. And he and I became friends, and eventually he and I wrote the book together, The Rabbi and CEO. I have it here. Looks a little bit like this. And we looked at the 10 Commandments and how could the 10 Commandments be useful in today's world, which is kind of a world, I call it a VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So again, our world has been turned upside down. The old rules don't apply anymore. The old management doesn't apply anymore. So how can we create a new kind of leadership or a new kind of management to deal with our lives? And I would say that the old tools don't really work anymore. And funnily enough, we discovered that the tools that actually work are 3,000 years old. They are the 10 Commandments.
So how are the 10 Commandments given to the people of Israel 3,000 years ago? How are they still relevant in the 21st century? What's your conclusion? Or in this webinar, we focus on the first commandment first.
Right. You know, I'll just give a few examples, okay? We will deal with the first commandment in a moment, but the second commandment is you shall have no idols. And we saw that so many of us are running after idols, whether it's wealth, whether it's you know, being famous, having lots of followers on LinkedIn or Facebook or lots of friends, being popular, having material goods, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to actually look at, rather than having idols, what is an authentic future, an authentic vision that I can have today? And I would assert that unless we do that, we will be caught in the old way of doing things, and we will react to this crisis rather than proactively creating the future. And then from there, looking how we can use this crisis even to build the future. The third commandment is, you shall not use my name in vain, which we saw has a lot to do with communication. How do we use language in a conscious way to build the future rather than destroy something? The fourth commandment, you shall have Shabbat. You know, I'm not talking about having Shabbat here on this call, but are we taking time out in this turbulence, in this wild time, to step back from the action and say, what's essential in my life? And for example, in my life, I became much closer to my family again through the lockdown. So the Shabbat was actually imposed on us by this lockdown.
I can
And
relate to
go
that.
on and on about the other commandments, but I think you get the picture that each commandment has a usefulness, has a relevance today. And I'll give you a little joke. There's a rabbi who asked a couple, are you really keeping the 10 commandments? And the husband says, of course we're keeping the 10 commandments. My wife keeps 6 and I keep the other 4.
So I think many of us can relate to what you just said. I can, for sure. And let's focus today on the first commandment, as we promised. I am Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, as it's phrased. What's the connection to this corona crisis there?
Yeah, so, great question. So the exact commandment is called, I am Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Now, when we look at the word Egypt, in Hebrew, Egypt is Mitzrayim. By the way, we're not talking about the modern Egypt, nothing against that country. We're talking about the ancient Egypt. Mitzrayim means a place of limitation, a place of narrowness, of constraint. And Moses, grew up in the court of the Pharaoh, and he was a prince, and he had everything he wanted. He had all the goods, he had meat, he had all the material goods that you could dream of. And yet he decided, we got to get out. We have to go out of Egypt into the desert. And by the way, according to the Torah, the Torah was actually given this week, many thousand years ago, Bamidbar, in the desert. So the Jews had to actually go into the desert where they were naked, where they didn't know who they were, to find who they were. So I find that to be an amazing metaphor. Can we leave the Egypt of our own constraints, our own brains that are maybe caught in old belief systems and old ways of thinking, old ways of doing stuff, old behaviors?
What is your view? What is Egypt today in the current crisis? What does it stand for? Yeah,
I would say it stands for those old tools that are maybe no longer relevant. VUCA, or not VUCA, but the corona crisis, I would say, has shown us that there's so much irrationality that happens. Okay, if I compare it, for example, to the, what is it called, the H1N1, right? The
H1N1, yeah.
H1N1, sorry. It's the swine flu that happened a few years ago. And that swine flu infected 2 billion people around the world. And yet there was not the sense of fear and the sense of threat that we're facing today. Today, and I don't mean to minimize the suffering and the deaths that have occurred. It's a terrible tragedy, but compared to the swine flu, it's really not such a huge deal. And yet the fear is happening. Companies are cutting out employees or sending them to furlough. Companies are reacting with a lot of fear. Human beings are reacting with fear. And I saw somewhere that our irrational behavior is about 85% of our total behavior is irrational, and only 15% are rational. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories that are happening. Maybe China is guilty for this, and China is taking over the world. The Chinese
economy has gotten a hit.
Exactly, and the Chinese say the US is taking over the world, or Israel is taking over the world, or the Jews are taking over the world. There's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of, I would even say, what do you call it, superstition.
Yep.
Where people cannot explain it. It's a VUCA phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that we cannot explain. It's not a linear phenomenon. Every day we have to deal with new challenges. And so people revert to those irrational things. And so to answer your question, I think one of the things is to actually go back to reality and say, what are the facts? And I discover for myself, I constantly am pulled in a direction where I want to, say there are too many masks or not enough masks, or the lockdown is ending too soon, or it's not ending soon enough. We need to go back to business as usual. So I do that too, and I think we all do that. And if we can go back to the facts and actually say, what are the facts? Okay, I'm in lockdown. Then we can see the opportunities, and then we can see how to manage this instead of getting carried away in all of the beliefs and all of the irrationality. So
we could get back to this after, and you mentioned business, let's say economy. We are challenged. Let's go to a poll here and try to get involved also the audience. We prepared a question for you, the audience, which you can hopefully now see. Where do you think the economy will be in a year from now? You can vote here. Is it, according to you, your opinion, better, worse, the same? Oh, I see votes coming in. Better or worse, or balanced, same, about 20% say the same. But a majority of each, 45%, almost 43% says better or worse. So only in the end 14% say it should be about the same in a year from now. And equally, people would think it's either better or worse. What do you think, Thomas?
This is amazing. So on this call, at least, exactly the same people say that it's going to be better, and the same amount of people say it's going to be worse. Do I get this correctly?
Yeah, there are 43% saying it's better, it's going to be better. Also 43% say it might be worse next year, and only 14% say they expect it to be the same. I'm sharing this now. Hopefully people can see it on their screen.
Yeah, very interesting. To be honest, I don't quite know what to make of this, but even though I'm a political economist, I go back to Rashi, who's one of the main commentators in the Torah, who said many times in the Bible that I don't know. So I guess one of the things that works in this crisis is also to just say, I don't know. And I see so many experts that are projecting their own stuff, their own background or their own beliefs onto the facts, and basically coloring the facts with their interpretations. So I think sometimes the very expertise that we have brought, that has made us who we are today, that has brought us all the achievements that we have today, can actually get in the way of being effective in this crisis right now.
There are many unknowns. You mentioned it beforehand, fake news. What is happening to us, and how can we stay in control and actually stay sane in this crisis? And as you mentioned before, irrationality as well.
Yeah. So one tool that has really worked for me, and I would recommend it, maybe I'll just explain it for a few minutes here. If you look at reality right now, I would say that there's an outer circle, which I'm going to call a circle of concern, okay? And the circle of concern is basically anything and everything that exerts an influence on us, but we have no control over it, okay? So a few examples about this: it's the media, it's the politics of Trump, it's the politics of China, it's the politics of Bibi Netanyahu, whoever you want to think, it's the weather, it's the corona crisis. There's actually very little impact that you and I have. And that's partly why we tend to talk a lot about this stuff. So I would say that from my observation, about 80% of the conversations that you and I have are about this outer circle of concern, where we actually have zero difference. We make no influence, and yet it concerns us a lot. Then there is a second layer, which is more inside, which is what I would call the circle of influence. And those are the things that I have an impact on, but it also has an impact on me. So for example, my health. I have something to say about whether I'm going to go running, whether I do my daily exercises, my 100 push-ups. And then obviously I don't have total control over my health. I have some influence, okay? And then it also influences me. Another example is my relationships. I have an influence on my relationships. I can call people and see how they're doing. I can support people now, even during the crisis. But I don't have control over the relationships. You know, people also have a choice whether they want to be related to me or not. And then there's the inner core of the circle. That's the only part of the circle where we have control. And there are only 3 things, I believe, that we have control over, at least from my experience in my life. Number 1, my interpretation. I have something to say about how I interpret this crisis, how I interpret what's going on right now. Second, I have control over my focus. What do I pay attention to? Do I pay attention to the fear? Do I pay attention to the fake news? Do I become enslaved by looking at the corona meter every 10 minutes to see who else died or who else got infected? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but you and I have a choice over what we focus on. What do we pay attention to? And then the third and last thing is I have control over my next step. I have the sovereignty over what I'm going to do about it. And I can choose to either take a time out, or I can choose to make something happen, or I can choose to reach out and work or not work. Okay, so that's a tool that has really worked for me to keep myself kind of clear in this crisis, and again to leave the Egypt of being enslaved by the narrowness or by whatever is going on around me, and actually have some self-determination. And I think that's what leadership is about, is to actually be self-determined and not to be enslaved in Egypt or in anything, not even in this corona crisis.
You would say this applies to individuals as well as companies? To apply those tools?
Yes, I would say it applies to individuals as well as companies. I'll give you an example. I was working with an aerospace company a few years ago, and we looked at what is the outdated set of beliefs. What's the Egypt, if you will, that is enslaving them? That is basically determining their mindset. It determines their behaviors. It determines their actions. And ultimately, it determines their results. And what we came to ultimately was that they have a belief deep down that, in quote, our best days are behind us. Now, imagine if you're a manager at that company and you go to work every morning and it's not like you're thinking it consciously or deliberately, but underneath it all, you have a mindset called our best days are behind us. So it can't get any better. I'm going to do my best efforts. I will do whatever I can. We can change the content of the company. We can change the CEO. We can change the staff. We can fire people. We can hire consultants. We can have a new strategy. But ultimately, if our best days are behind us and that drives us, then it will never get really different from today. And so they had to actually free themselves. And by the way, I don't think that you can completely just throw that away and say, I'm now creating a new New Year's resolution or a new affirmation, and now I'm going to be free of all this. This will always be there. But the question is, what's the future that you're going to create that creates a new bottle, if you will, right? So what I'm describing is kind of a bottle that no matter what I put in, whether I put in water into the bottle, it will have the shape of the bottle. Whether I put in oil, it will still have the shape of the bottle. Whether I put in sand, it will still be the bottle. So this bottle is unchanged and I cannot break it. But I should not focus only on the content or what I change, but actually on that bottle. And once I can see what the bottle is, and my people in the company know what the bottle is, then I have a chance to create a new bottle in a way that hopefully is bigger and more future oriented.
Thomas, we are now almost half an hour into our webinar on the 10 Commandments for Turbulent Times. Now, certainly out there will be questions in the audience, which we now open. You can ask Thomas questions via the Q&A or the chat. So let's open the Q&A.
Just while people are formulating their questions or while you're collecting the questions, I just want to say one more thing about the fear and the emotions that are gripping us, okay? And that's kind of the Egypt in this crisis right now. Many of you know the work of Daniel Kahneman, who's the only Nobel laureate for economics who actually was not an economist, okay? And Daniel Kahneman wrote different theories about the irrationality of the human brain. And what he saw was that there is something called negativity dominance. And that's something that's deeply ingrained in our brains. It's way, way older than you and I. There was actually a Soviet psychologist whose name was Bluma Ziganek, who actually came up with this as well. And she called it the Sickening Effect. And what it is we tend to have way more negativity dominance than equal between negative and positive. And that comes from about 10,000 years ago, that you and I came out of the cave and a shadow was flying over our heads. And we had to decide in a split second, is this shadow a condor that's trying to kill me and eat me up? Or is it some kind of a nice cloud in the sky? And to be negative was a survival strategy that really worked well, okay? So we survived by being negative, by fearing the worst, by being pessimistic. But in today's world, that negativity dominance is not necessarily useful.
We still have it in us.
Yeah, we still have it in us. You know, the amygdala kicks in immediately. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm in survival. I need to survive this. I need to go into overdrive. We need to fire people. We need to do something. And to actually recognize that is the first step to freeing yourself from the Egypt and to actually see, okay, that was useful at that time. It's still there, as Georg says, but now it may not be useful for the facts that I'm facing today.
We have a first question coming in from Philip. As a wrap up, what concrete tools in the 10 Commandment toolbox do you recommend us, the audience, to start using today? Let's say the top 3.
The top 3, okay. Well, let me choose some that I didn't say yet, okay? Because I was talking about the second commandment, which is to go from, and by the way, you will get this bookmark as a gift after the webinar. The second is no idols, right? Build an authentic vision. I said that already. And the third is not in vain, to actually use language consciously and concretely. But I want to talk also about the 9th commandment for a moment, since Philip gave me 3 options, right? The 9th commandment is, you shall not give false testimony. And I find that when a crisis hits, that so many people they kind of don't face the facts. That's now the other side of the negativity dominance. We tend to make it a little bit nicer than it is. I'll give an example. In the crisis in 2008, some bankers that I talked to, I'm sorry?
The banking crisis.
The economic crisis in 2008. The bankers were telling me, these were some former clients, they were telling me, you know, we were rearranging the sand at the beach while the tsunami was rolling in, right? So we didn't see it coming. And I think that especially CEOs now and also managers are surrounded by people that agree with them, that don't give them the bad news, the so-called bad news. They don't give them the facts. And so then they think, oh, I'm brilliant, that this is all great. But what you have to do sometimes is actually what I call declare a breakdown. So you actually say, okay, this is not working right now. For example, we're in this crisis, I'm in quarantine, I cannot reach out to my clients right now the same way. Okay, now that's a fact, okay? Whether that's good or bad, that's a different story. Obviously, my brain goes into stories about, it's not good and I'm losing money or whatever.
Yeah.
But if I look again at the future that I want to create, what's my original commitment that I have? My original commitment is to serve my clients, for example. Great. Then let's create a new future where my clients are satisfied. And then I look at the crisis again and say, how could we, even during the crisis, find options to have my clients be satisfied, or to have my clients get the insights that I can't give right now in a seminar, okay? So maybe new options show up, okay? And I would say, Georg, that the companies and also the individuals that don't look at the future right now and don't free themselves from the old unexamined assumptions and beliefs will get stuck. They will get stuck in this crisis, and you cannot get there from here. So you have to actually do it from the future and then think backwards to the present and see what's the breakthrough that is correlated to the breakdown.
To not be stuck in the old Egypt.
Exactly.
So we have a second question coming in from Rudi, who's thanking for the webinar and asking to give him more coping strategies for dealing with sorrows, or we can also say worries maybe.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Rudi, and great to have you on the webinar. Rudi is from Swiss television, so this is great. I assume it's that Rudi, right?
It is.
Yeah, so how can I deal with sorrow, or how can I deal with depression or negative feelings that come up? And by the way, I'm not saying, I'm not saying suppress them or push them away. I think the key is to actually feel them, to start by actually saying, okay, great, I have this feeling. What is the feeling that I have right now? What is really going on? And to take a moment to step back from the action and say, okay, right now I feel kind of anxious, for example, right? So I might feel anxious. And then I can see what's the source of that? What are the facts that have produced the anxiety in me? And then I can distinguish between that anxiety, between what's going on with me, which is actually my interpretation. And I said earlier, right, you have the inner core of, you have a choice. You have control over what you focus on, and you have control over how you interpret stuff. You have control over how you interpret your emotions. So if you have an emotion called worry or anxiety, for example, what I would recommend, or what has worked for me at least, is to distinguish that from the facts. In other words, I distinguish the facts from the fiction. And I say, okay, the facts are, I cannot see my father-in-law right now, okay? The facts are, my portfolio lost 20% of its value. The facts are, et cetera, right? So those are facts. But I can distinguish those facts from my reaction to the facts and say, aha, so I meant that to mean that maybe all hell will break loose, or, I'm not safe anymore, or I'm in survival. And I need to now go into overdrive and do something, or I'm completely depressed and I'm paralyzed, I can't move anymore. And I found that if I distinguish those two, the facts from the fiction, it gives me more room to maneuver. It gives me more power in a way. It gives me more control ultimately. So I hope that that's useful.
Hopefully the question is answered. Somebody was commenting, Sylvia Stauffer was commenting, we might also have to touch the aspects of distress in sorrow, or sadness even in such a situation with individuals.
Yeah, sadness is a similar reaction that comes up. And again, I'm not talking about suppressing those emotions. Those are very primal emotions that are going on. And I find that if I can name the emotion very precisely, you know, I'm sad, and maybe I could look at when did that start, okay? It's a reaction to something, and it's a legitimate reaction. Again, it's not something that I should push away or say, well, I'm only going to think positive. By the way, this webinar is not about thinking positive, okay? I have no business about being positive. But if I can say, okay, great, I'm sad, and then I say, when did it start? It started when I couldn't see my kids anymore, or my grandkids, okay? My grandkids are in lockdown. I may be a person who's in the risk group. I cannot see them. And that's when I started to feel isolated at first. And then I started to feel very sad, and to let yourself actually feel that. By the way, as a footnote, I'm not a psychologist, okay? So maybe I'm saying something completely crazy here for the scientific profession. I'm only using these tools because they work. They have worked for me, they've worked for my clients. So when I can distinguish between when it started and my reaction, and what was the source of it, then I can create a new relationship to that emotion and say, oh, interesting. And by the way, just the act of observation, the act of naming it, already puts me into a more self-determined place. I'm less other-determined. I'm not the slave of the emotion. I'm not in the Egypt of the emotion. I'm now saying, okay, I feel sad. Now I have a choice. Do I want to keep feeling sad, or do I want to actually create something different? And then again, I can create a new way of dealing with what produced the sadness. Okay, I could say, okay, great, I cannot see my kids. What could I do to alter that? Okay, maybe I could create some kind of a ritual with them where I read them goodnight stories every night over Zoom.
Yeah.
Maybe I could reach out to other people so that I'm not feeling so isolated. So suddenly I become more able to act and to have a choice.
So people are raising hands now. I see there's more comments. You can still add comments too in the chat section. And you can also let us know as part of the audience if you were missing something today, or if this webinar.
Actually, Georg, could you run one more poll? I thought we had a poll which I think could be funny, the one about what you bought recently.
Actually, maybe we have to move this one to the chat, like people can answer us in the chat as well, because the poll option doesn't seem to work right now.
I see.
But we have one more question for sure in the chat box. And if people want to continue with us here, we are still going to be around for about 10-20 minutes. We have one more question here concerning how can we engage other people around us in the 10 Commandment toolbox thinking that you just presented to us before, the 10 Commandments for turbulent times.
Right. So what I found works really well is if I don't try to convince people of anything. I found that if I go out and I say, hey, this is you should do the 4th commandment, you know, it's Shabbat and you should step back from the action. That usually does not work. I found, to say it in a kind of an abstract way, the truth used ceases to be true. So in other words, if I use the truth, these commandments are profound truths. They are wise statements that somebody came up with. And by the way, you don't have to believe in God to use them. Even Rashi, I mean, there's some people who say that Rashi, the main commentator in the Torah, did maybe not believe in God. So these commandments are not about what you believe. They're really about what you do. And I found that if you use the 10 Commandments as a truth, then you become like a missionary. You become like a proselytizer. You become like somebody who wants to convince people. And I found that if I do an inquiry, rather than advocacy. In other words, if I do life as an exploration, if I'm not convinced that I know what's true, if I'm not convinced that I have the answers, if I'm not convinced that I know, I will actually be more powerful with this stuff. I'm sorry for calling it stuff, that's maybe disrespectful, but I will be more powerful with these commandments if I live them. And then people say, wow, how did you just do that? And then I might share something about what works for me, but I would not go out and use this on people, or, you know, use it like a weapon in the worst case. Like, oh yeah, you should communicate better because it says, don't use my name in vain. Or you should honor your father and mother. You have a disrespectful relationship with your parents, which obviously we would say to my own daughters, but I don't say it out in the house, okay?
Silvio Stauffer is asking for you to tell us more about your 10 commandments in your book, or your interpretation of the 10 commandments, therefore.
All right. So let me give another quick overview. And again, you will get this bookmark. Since you subscribe, you're going to get by email a PDF of the bookmark, and you'll get a PDF of a self-assessment where you can actually rate yourself along those commandments. How are you living them? And, you know, just one more word about this exploration. That's something that I find very powerful in the Jewish tradition, is to not have one person that tells us what the truth is. You know, the Talmud, for example, is a collection of many different rabbis, many different sages, many of whom disagreed with each other. They made fun of each other, they insulted each other, all in search of finding a truth. But it was not a monolithic truth. It was not like I know and everybody else doesn't, and now we have to bring the light to people. It's more like, let's be in this shared exploration. So with that, let me say the other, I think the other 4 that are still missing. So the 5th is to honor your father and mother, right? And we turned that into appreciation. So we basically said, whatever you can appreciate gives you power. And I find that, especially in this crisis, if I can find things to appreciate, and sometimes, you know, I give this as an assignment where you have to appreciate something else every single day, or tell another person every day why your life is amazing. If you think that's too cheesy or too cliche or whatever, don't do it, okay? But it really works to find something else to appreciate every day, and especially the things that are looking like an obstacle or a constraint or a barrier.
It's a proven tool.
Why do I have to work for this boss? To find those things that bother you, and see, what could I appreciate about this? What could I appreciate that we're having this webinar right now, and it's such a beautiful day, and I would love to be with my family right now in the garden, and I'm sitting here with you. I can appreciate something about this, right? Because it gives me life, and hopefully it gives you life. The 6th commandment is don't kill, right? You shall not kill. And so it becomes anger management. So this is a little bit more about how you regulate negative emotions. And I would say there's a lot of anger. You know, I just saw that some retailers are facing angry customers, and 50% of the customers are angry because, you know, because they think that everybody else should wear a mask, and the retailer should be enforcing the mask rule, for example, in the state of Connecticut in the US.
Yep.
The other 50% of the customers are angry because they think the retailer should not have a mask requirement and should not force anybody to wear masks, right? So there's a lot of anger going on, a lot of anger against anybody who's not us, against anybody who thinks differently from us. And to actually regulate those emotions, that to me is the 6 commandments. And I give some tools about how you can do that, you know, how you can dissociate yourself from the emotion and not be enslaved by it, and actually use it to make a difference. I'll give an example. Roger Federer, who's my big hero in Basel, the tennis professional, he actually used to be known as a very angry tennis player when he was about 16.
Yep.
And then unfortunately his trainer died, or you could say fortunately, I don't know. But his trainer died, his coach died, and Roger Federer fell into a deep depression. And for several months he felt like, I don't want to be a pro, I think it's all senseless, why am I in this life? And then he somehow came out of that and said, what difference could I make, or how could I be great? And he actually started regulating his anger. Now, when you see Roger Federer, he's still getting angry. He's still a human being, as far as I know. But now he's regulating it, and he's channeling the anger into making a contribution, or into building his future, or into winning Wimbledon, or whatever the objective is. That's the sixth one. Georg, should I go on the seventh, or?
We have a question coming in, but I don't want to interrupt your flow. Maybe we can let you go ahead, and I'll ask you that last question that I see here afterwards.
Great. So the seventh is the seventh commandment is no adultery, right? So basically, don't sleep with people outside of your life partner, or your marriage. In the literal sense, we all know what that means, okay? But in the figurative sense, this commandment is about, in my view, about integrity. It's about not sleeping around intellectually, if you will, or in your actions. In other words, don't say something up here and then do something down here. Have a congruence between what you say and what you do. And I would say that if any area of your life is not working, or if any area of your company is not working, it's probably for a lack of integrity. And let's be careful here. I'm not talking about integrity as a moral or ethical phenomenon. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about integrity as almost like a bicycle wheel. If you picture a bicycle wheel, and the wheel is perfectly and flawlessly designed, the wheel will function perfectly, okay? Or if you take a software, the software has been designed with integrity, which means it flawlessly performs when you use it. I'm not gonna say whether it's Windows or Mac, okay? Or Android or iPhone or whatever. But
right.
if you have a software that has integrity, it will function and perform perfectly. And the same is true in our lives. And the same is true in our companies. In other words, if I can achieve a congruence between my word and my deed, my word and my deed, if those are congruent, in other words, if I say, you know, I'm going to be there at 8 o'clock, and I am there at 8 o'clock, or you can have the report by 5 p.m. and you have the report, I will honor my word, yes? And if to the degree that I honor my word, I will have power in my life. And I could give you countless examples of where that's the case.
We only have about 10 minutes to go.
Yeah.
And one more question.
One more word, Georg.
Yep.
One more word about this. I'm not talking about that you can always keep your word. If you always keep your word, your word is not big enough, okay? Then you don't have objectives or promises that are big enough. It's absolutely okay to not always keep your word. So for example, if in Keren Ayesot, you know, we have a certain objective by the end of the year, and we notice that we cannot achieve that, it's okay to say, you know, I'm not going to keep my promise, but I can still honor my word by saying that. Okay, so I have to then clean up the mess that is produced by not keeping my word, and that's still honoring my word. Or if I say to my boss, by the way, I'm not coming in tomorrow, I'm going to say no. I'm going to step back and not come in. That also has integrity, because I said what I'm going to do, and I do it. Okay. Sorry, Georg, for interrupting you.
No worries. That was interesting. And we have a question, last question that I find interesting from Robert Marcus. It's a longer question, therefore bear with me. where does our diet come into this pandemic? If we eat animals tortured and slaughtered, it's killing. How can we eat murdered animals and be healthy? 3 question marks. Robert is saying he's a vegan and only eating plant-based products. Trees give us avocado, he says, and many fruits. Plants give us greens with chlorophyll. So I find this very interesting as a husband of a health coach and as a part-time vegan myself. But I'm actually a flexitarian, therefore I can't say I'm in the same league. But I find this question very interesting. Like, where does diet and our act in nature come into this pandemic?
That's a great question. And just to put the record straight, I'm a complete opportunist in terms of food. Okay. Anyway, now I detect under the question a certain subtext, or in other words, this is a question. It looks like a question, but it's actually a statement. And I think the statement is, we would be in way better shape as a planet if people did not eat so much meat. Okay. Now this goes back to me to the 3rd commandment, which is about not using my name in vain. So in other words, how can I use language powerfully? And I would assert that if I can listen to the subtext of a question, and by the way, I may be wrong, okay? I could probably have a discussion with Robert. Is it Robert or Robbie?
Yes.
Yeah, I could have a discussion with you about what exactly you asked, and maybe I misunderstood and I'm going with my own assumptions, in which case I should be cleaned up and corrected. But if I can listen for the subtext, and in the book I'm actually giving a tool where you listen for 3 subtexts that are underneath the text. Number 1, what does the person want? We always want something, even while I'm speaking with you right now. We want something.
Killing is in the 10 Commandments. Robert adds here, killing is in the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's actually living the 6th commandment. So that's a very good point. But I'm going to continue in the 3rd commandment. So the first is the person wants to achieve something. And I think Robbie is demonstrating this right now. I think he wants to make sure that we live this commandment not to kill animals, for example. The second is the person is usually saying something about themselves, even if they are not saying it in the text of their message. And so what's the person disclosing about themselves? That's the second subtext, self-disclosure. And then the third is they want to relate. They want to be connected or want to somehow reaffirm the relationship. I'll give you an example from my parents, my late parents, when they were still alive. My mother would ask my father, Heinz, aren't you cold? That was the text, okay? But then underneath that were the 3 subtexts. Number 1, she wanted him to close the window or bring her a sweater. Number 2, she said, I'm helpless, I'm cold, I'm weak. And number 3, you're supposed to be my husband. You're supposed to take care of me. So this is just a simple example of how we could use that 3rd commandment. But having said that, I absolutely love what Robbie said. And I'm using the 5th commandment to appreciate the reminder that we should be very careful about what we kill, who we kill, maybe inadvertently. Is there anything in my life where I'm contributing to the death of human beings or beings or of the planet, right? And I think we could interpret the 6th commandment that way. I think that's it's a beautiful thought. Frankly, I was not aware of before this call.
Robert is adding, we are reaping what we sow, and the plants are actually have a full range of foods to offer, which I have to agree. We could probably go with plants alone and some additives.
Absolutely, and you guys are in the majority, so thanks for saying that.
Andrea is saying thank you very much. She said goodbye, therefore, and we have to say goodbye soon as well. We have 3 minutes to go, and
after all,
then we wrap it up here.
We got to be on time, right?
Yes, this webinar will be available on YouTube soon, from what I know. And therefore we wrap it up for today on the 10 Commandments. And if you have interest in hearing more about what you just heard now, like more on the 10 Commandments and the impact in the 21st century, you can leave your notes in the comments section. And I want to say thank you again, Thomas, for taking your time, and thanking everyone for participating on such a beautiful day. At least here in Switzerland, it's sunny. I believe in many places on the globe it is good weather today. And for those who want to tune in later, they can do that via YouTube. And thanks again to Keren Hayesot in Israel, the Help Foundation, for providing us with a webinar platform. First of all, Thomas is their president in Switzerland, in the Swiss branch, for the Swiss branch, and on the board of the World Executive. You participants will get more informations and invitations from them, from Keren Hayesot and from Thomas, to further webinars. No obligation, but since you registered for this one, you'll be kept in the loop, and we will email you further info. Also, what Thomas already said, the 2 free gifts, the bookmark, maybe you want to show it again, as well as self-assessment along the 10 Commandments to work with.
Wonderful. Now, given, Georg, that we don't have the poll function, is it possible for people to just say, yes, I would like to see further webinars on the 10 Commandments, or no, I don't care. You know, this was great, but thank you. Is it possible for them to do this?
Via the chat, or also raising hands. That's what I see here. So, yeah, unfortunately, our poll option didn't work as we hoped, or I didn't manage to make it work because I was focused on what you had to say, Thomas. and you have any parting words for us you want to leave us with today?
Absolutely. But I think what I get from the questions that were asked, and thank you so much everybody for the really powerful questions that allowed us all to explore this much deeper and much more in an actionable way. So I really appreciate the inputs, and I get from it that there is an interest in this type of exploration and that we should continue, but that's just maybe that's my optimistic mindset, okay? So parting words. Number one, I would recommend that if nothing else from this webinar, that you choose 3 key words that will guide you through this crisis. I'll give you an example for myself, and please don't copy me, but look at your own words that work for you. But my words that I put in my calendar, it pops up every hour or every 2 hours. My words are, I am source, which means I'm an author, I'm not the victim. Number 2, I'm patient, which is a big thing of mine in my life, to be patient. And the 4th commandment reminds me that all hell will break loose if people are not patient. The golden calf happened because people were impatient. David was impatient to get Bathsheba. People commit great sins if they're impatient. So I'm going to work on patience. And then the 3rd and last is I'm free. I am not a slave of anything or anybody. Okay, so those are the words that work for me. I invite you to look at what words work for you, that will strengthen you, that will give you control in this crisis, that will give you really the chance and the opportunity that lies in this crisis, because the Chinese word, as you know, means, the Chinese word for crisis means both danger and opportunity. So for you to be in touch with the opportunity. And the last thing I want to say is that there was a rabbi in the 18th century, whose name was Rabbi Zusha of Onipolin. And Rabbi Zusha said, in the world to come, I shall not be asked, why were you not Moses? I shall be asked, why were you not Zusha? And so I'm inviting and asking each one of you on this call, and each one of you looking at this video on YouTube or anywhere, look at who you are. what is the unique you that has been put on this planet for a purpose? What is that purpose? And then go and do it and fulfill it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thanks everyone for participating. Bye-bye. Hopefully soon again.
Bye. All the best.
Kol tov.